Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Welcome back to another weekly study. Now, again, Happy New Year. I just wanted to make sure that y'all understood, and I wanted to spend this weekly study going over what apparently is always going to be an issue for a lot of folks, and that is if you are crunched for time when it comes to taking your exam. So I'm not going to do a PowerPoint. I just wanted to pull up what you actually already have access to, and it is the exam blueprint study guide that we have on the site itself. So it's not a bad idea. It's a PDF. You can download it, print it out, and I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of things with you because we see it. In fact, I saw it on one of the posts, and some folks can be very honest. And she actually said, "I'm sure that this is a very common question." By the way, I think it was Mary Elena. It is a very common question. In fact, it's not only common on the Facebook page. We get it all the time coming in from the students that have gone through the BDU course and are moving on to the NASM as well. And that question is always, I'm crunched for time. What do I do? Right. And that's one of the reasons why we have a general study guide. Now, remember, we also have more resources that are available. We have an entire prep course that has every single chapter, in-depth study, just videos like this, an audio book if you're in need of kind of listening to the chapters being read to you. And I'll be honest with you, most of this comes down to what we deal with quite often in the actual Facebook group, which is I have 3 weeks left. I have 1 month left. I started here and whatever, life got in the way, and we understand that for sure. And so the question is always, well, where do I go from here? I mean, you can always do an extension, right? And NASM, they'll let you know when your time has passed, or you should know at least when you're coming close. But the first thing, and this is one of the best things about the group, is that students are constantly, and those that have passed or failed at least once, passed a second time, are always coming in to give folks a pat on the back and say, take a deep breath, step back, you got this. And my answer in reply to that is, you're absolutely right. And thank goodness we have other folks in there that are constantly chiming in. If you have taken the exam and failed it, now you're coming back and you're frustrated, or if you are, coming really close and you haven't had a whole lot of time to study, this is the study for you. Now, just keep in mind, this goes for anybody, basically in any type of testing scenario. When you're getting prepared to take any type of standardized test, your goal is to memorize as much material as you can, and then to take as many or answer as many practice questions as you can. Remember, taking practice exams helps in one very specific way, and that is the timing element. So if you've got 120 questions and you have an hour and a half or 2 hours to do it, that's what the practice exam really helps with. Now, as you scratch below the surface, what you're really interested in practice exams are the questions. You want to be able to navigate these questions as best you can. So that's why I pulled up, I've got a copy of our study guide for the NASM 7th edition, and it's probably one of the best things that you can use right off the bat. I can't help you to study, other than to give you basic methodologies that have worked for many different types of students. And so the best way that I have found to begin the study process, I don't care if you have a week left and you're literally taking it and you haven't read anything, or you've gone through the entire textbook and you've been studying for literally months and months. Irrespective of that, the best thing and the first piece of advice that I can always give to somebody is know what your learning style is. You need to know your learning style, because if you understand your learning style, you make your study time, however long that is, whether it's 3 days of studying or 3 months of studying, the most efficient it can be. So just keep that in mind. If you understand, and yes, I know there's folks out there that say learning style is, whatever, it's doesn't exist, or what, there are some folks that say that it's not relevant. What we have found at Body Design University, it can be very relevant. If you already know how to study and you're comfortable with that, you're good to go anyway. There are no tips or tricks. The only tips and tricks that we know of, those of us that are in the educational system that do education on a regular basis, is the ability to know how best to memorize material. I'm not going to say that again. If you look at any of the videos, any of the materials that we have put out at Body Design University, it always comes down to the same thing, which is, how do you memorize material? How does your brain work to memorize material? Once you figure that out, now it's just a matter of putting the time in. A lot of folks get freaked out and stressed out from studying because they're not very good at studying. Please keep in mind, studying involves a whole lot more than just reading or listening, going to a lecture, watching a video. Studying requires effort, and anybody can study. Okay, anybody can study efficiently, but you got to know how your brain works. Don't study in inefficient ways. In other words, don't read, right, and rewrite if reading doesn't work for you, and it doesn't for a lot of folks. Now, for the vast majority of folks, you've got to read the material, and that's why we have, a study guide. So the idea is that if listening, right, listening to information, watching and listening to a video like this, for instance, if that helps you, then that's what you go with. And then you can rewrite. I will say this, that I don't know anybody, irrespective of learning style, that does not increase retention and memorization when they do the writing component. I don't know anybody. Everybody that I have ever dealt with, taught, it doesn't matter, myself included, writing material over and over. And by the way, I didn't pull it out for you, but I've got markers, colored markers. If you're not colorblind, by the way, use color as a great way to help you memorize material. When you're reading or listening and rewriting, change up the colors, change up the fonts. I know you have a style of handwriting. Sometimes it's actually, you ever doodle? You notice how when you doodle, you're drawing pictures, and sometimes we'll use that creative component of your brain to help push information into your short and then midterm memory. What really helps with the long-term memory component is the redoing it over and over and over on a regular basis. Okay. So again, that's there's no magic to it. Have one of these, they're called pens or pencils, and have some of these, they're called colored markers. Whatever colors work for you. Now, I'm not saying highlight. I am not a proponent of highlighting at all, to be honest with you. In my experience, a couple of decades of doing this, highlighters, no, it's a very inefficient. And I know some of you are going to say, well, that's what helped me pass. Good for you. If that helped you, then fantastic. I'm just telling you my experience. And what I tell folks is, don't highlight it. Instead of highlighting it, forget that part and rewrite it. It's the writing, lining across to pull information out that you think you're just going to have to do it again anyway. That's why you highlighted it, because you thought it was important information. No, don't worry about highlighting. Literally take the information that you're reading, say, for instance, in the study guide or in the textbook itself, and rewrite it. And that constant physicality of rewriting it over and over and over will actually help your short and midterm memory. Again, longer term memory compartmentalization, the ability to hold data and information, generally comes from the consistent redoing of that studying process. So if I write down the definition of a word, or if I write down a concept, and I do it once, okay, I'm going to have better retention than if I just read it and didn't do anything else. However, if I rewrite it and I rewrite it again and I rewrite it again over, you almost cannot forget it. You almost dream about it. And if you did it today and then did it tomorrow and did it the next day over and over, trust me, you'll look at a question about autogenic inhibition, and the first thing that'll pop into your head is Golgi tendon organ. It'll just pop into your head. You won't even realize it. But if you kept writing down the definition over and over, reciprocal inhibition, autogenic inhibition, your serratus anterior being underactive and protraction of the shoulder girdle and above, all those things will, believe it or not, become automatic because they're going to be embedded into your mid and then long-term memory, but that's consistency over and over. If you want to call that a trick, then it's a trick. If you want to call it a tip, that's a better way to look at it. So again, what I wanted to do, because I've seen this time and time again, and for you folks that are crunched for time, let me just help you. So remember, when it comes to the studying process itself, I can literally go on for days to explain it to you. But what you need to do first and foremost is find out what your learning style is. And there's a ton of links you can go to. Just put learning style testing, Google it, and then you'll come up. They'll ask you 10 questions, 12 questions. You already know your learning style. You do, because there's many of you out there that will, just like myself, now I can read and memorize, but if it's boring material, I can't read it, because then I find myself going over and doing this. And then I'm like, oh, where was I? And I got to go back and reread it. Well, I just wasted 15 minutes. See, isn't that what frustrates a lot of you? You feel like you've wasted all this time. I studied for 4 hours. No, you didn't study. You didn't study for 4 hours. You might have read something for 4 hours or whatever that is, but you didn't study. Okay. The concept of studying is actually getting all this in here and getting it to stick. That's called studying. Looking at stuff, listening to stuff, and not getting it to stick, that ain't studying. That's unfortunately a waste of time. And we want to get you away from that. And the way you do that is you got to know how your brain works. So that's the first step that you have to do. And by the way, inside this study guide, in particular, precision study tips, you got to know your learning style. Study at least 1 hour every day. You get it. There are some basic things you can do. And so, by the way, in this study guide, please keep in mind the following as you proceed. Know your learning style. You got to memorize material. If you've got 1 week left, and by the way, I would go ahead and just, again, you can access this. It tells you what the low priority chapters are, what high priority chapters are. If I had 1 week to study for the NASM exam and I never read the textbook, I probably wouldn't read the textbook. Okay. It's a thick textbook. I don't know if you can, I got one back here. It's a big textbook. You ain't reading in a week, and you're not learning and memorizing material in a week. You have to, by the way, that's why Cliff Notes were invented. Cliff Notes have been around for 40, 50 years, as far as I can remember. I used to use them in high school and junior high school. But you got to do the Cliff Notes. If you've got a week left, and you haven't done anything and you want to take the test, I don't recommend it, but that's your decision. You got to know where the vast majority of the material is on the test to give yourself the best shot. That's why you go through a general study guide, which is what we have here. And in this study guide in particular, it will tell you there's basically 4 chapters, 5 chapters, something like that, where if you knew everything in those chapters, literally everything, you could probably get a 60 on the exam, 65 on the exam, because of the number of questions that come from those particular chapters. So you just got to be cognizant of the fact that if you haven't gone through the material, you're already a one-legged ice skater. I don't know what to tell you. You simply can't. That's why we recommend 3 months minimum to go through these materials. But if you can't, see, here it is. If you can't, and you're now crunching, first thing you got to do is take a deep breath, step back, and go through a more concise, collapsed study guide that basically tells you, out of the 7th edition has 23, I think it's 23 chapters. You don't need to, you better not read through all 23, because I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to get the information. There's about 5 or 6. In the study guides, it tells you what are high priority chapters, because we already know, based on the domain scenario that NASM has set up, that in the 4 or 5 or 6 different exam templates that they use, you're going to see a certain number of questions, right? Percentage of the 120 question test, a certain percentage are going to come from chapter 6 or from chapter 8 or from chapter 14 or whatever the case is. If that's what you've got to do, that's your best bet. Good luck. I hope you do well. I really do. Let's say you got a month. Okay, well, now think about this. You now can start reading the textbook. But again, you would still use a general study guide, and then you would spend some time in the textbook. Okay. Again, if you got 3 days or a week or even 2 weeks, I mean, I guess you can read through the textbook, but it's just not going to be as effective as if you just stayed hone in on those particular chapters. By the way, whether you have 3 days or 3 months, you're still using the read, write, recite method. It's just you're doing it with less or condensed level of information. And that's kind of the idea, is that one way or the other, if you want to retain information, if you're going to freak out because you've only got a week left to do it, I get it. But try and minimize your freaking outness and get to work, which means get to reading and rewriting it, listen to whatever you have to do. Yes, I know you're going to go to a ton of websites and blogs and all these other, and you're going to spend money on practice exams, things like that. You've got to do practice exams, of course. You've got to do them. It's going to be the only way that you're exposed to what you're probably going to see on the test, specifically if it's your first time taking it. So, blueprint, study guide. You've got to understand where you're at as far as capabilities to learn the material prior to actually taking the exam. So again, in response to a lot of posts that we get and just internal communiques that we get constantly from students that have gone through our BDU course and now are moving into the NASM testing, the goal here is to determine how much time do you have, okay? And given that amount of time, what is the best strategy? The best strategy always is know your learning style first and foremost, so you can maximize your study efficiency, right? So that's the first thing. Get yourself a study guide. I'm sure there are a ton of other study guides out there, but since we're partners with NASM, we have a pretty good in-depth knowledge of where the majority of questions are coming from the particular domains. Spend time in those particular chapters, focus in on that, and then you've got to do practice exams. Do as many as you can do, as many practice questions as you can do. When you don't know an answer to a practice test question, your main goal is to go back and understand why. Now, again, I know NASM, if you're doing their course, they're giving you quizzes. And yes, I know a lot of those quiz questions have no resemblance to the actual exam questions. Of course, Body Design University has very precise, specific practice exams that you can test with. And so that's what I wanted to go over with you today. I hope this has been helpful. We're going back to the same old strategies. Know how much time you have. The longer you have, the more time you can spend within the textbook, within particular subject matter. The shorter the time you have, got to do lots of practice exams, and you've got to hone in on those high priority chapters. And you got to know your learning style so that you can be efficient in your studying. Again, I hope that this study was helpful for you. Remember, post your questions inside the Facebook group itself. And if you know other folks, get them to post about the NASM and any type of questions they may have. If you, by the way, if you actually do an online test to figure out what your study methodology, best way to do it is, go ahead and post that in and let folks know what you learned about your learning style. And if it benefits you, keep in mind, this group is not only designed to help you get answers to some of your questions, it also gives you an opportunity to help other folks that are going through the process as well. So again, if you have questions, post them directly into the group. Remember, Corey and I do a Q&A every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Any questions you have there, even when it comes to, in particular, real world questions, because remember, what happens after you pass the NASM exam? you're going to step into the real world. And that's where we can really help you, particularly from the business standpoint, nutrition perspective as well. It's always a pleasure. If you have any questions, go ahead and just let us know. We're here to help you so that you can pass that NASM exam on the first attempt. Have a great weekend. Thanks.